Hello, everyone. Welcome to the newest masterclass here in the Inner Circle. Today, we're going to be discussing the game plan to heal trauma bonds, attachments, and entanglements. But first, let's talk about our agreement for this masterclass and perhaps every masterclass within the Inner Circle. One, you understand that healing is a process and it's not overnight magic. Sometimes we have a tendency to want things to speed along quickly and we get frustrated and we want to give up. I want us to understand and have an agreement that you understand that the healing process isn't linear by any means. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. So I want us to understand that it's not going to be overnight magic. This process also requires your dedication to the daily, weekly practice of healing. It also requires your willingness to give up the old behaviors that keep you stuck, and you have to be ready to take charge of your healing process even when it gets difficult. You are also receptive to feedback and eager to make the necessary changes to move past these challenges. You're going to have days where you don't want to do any of these things. You're going to have days where you're just like, you know what? I'm going to go back to doing what I want to do. Okay. Just understand that as long as you come back to this, you're good. Okay. You're going to have days where you're just like, yeah, Ginger, I don't really know about this anymore. I'm done. Expect that this will happen. Okay. And this is all a part of the healing process. All right. So the next thing I want to go over is our disclaimer. You understand that this masterclass and other masterclasses, the content doesn't replace the need for medical and or psychological treatment where indicated. You agree to be mindful of your own mental health and well-being during the consumption of the content here, and you will seek appropriate medical treatment, including but not limited to psychotherapy and or psychiatric services if needed. And most of all, the content here does not provide, nor does it hold itself out to providing medical, psychiatric, or psychotherapy services. All right, so let's get started. I wanted to give an overview about every thing that will happen in this masterclass because we will be breaking this into two parts. So within this video, we're going to be covering steps 1 and 2. However, I'm going to give you an overview of what 3, 4, and 5 also look like. Okay, so understand that steps 1 and 2 will be in this particular video. Steps 3, 4, and 5 will be covered in a separate video. Again, because this is a pretty large masterclass and I want to give you all a chance to consume and process the information rather than just kind of laying it all on you and then having you feel overwhelmed. All right, so step 1, we're looking at your mindset because what we want to develop here in step 1 is your awareness and deepen your insight into what's happening. Because you're here because you already have some awareness that you've been struggling with trauma bonds. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about how to deepen your awareness around trauma bonds, how they show up, where they come from, and why you need to engage in the necessary work to heal them. All right. Step 2, this is where a lot of the work begins. We're going to be discovering your core wounds, your core beliefs, as well as the significant unresolved events from your timeline. This discovery will show you how your unresolved emotional pain from the past continues to show up in your relationships today, courtesy of the partnership between your brain and unconscious mind. Your life timeline, which you'll be completing within this step, also known as your Pandora's box, holds all significant and unresolved issues from your past that have the potential to show up as trauma bonds. They also hold the key to unmet emotional needs, which show up as the common threads in each of your relationships. Okay, so let's go into step 3. It's a pretty big step within this masterclass. This is why I wanted to keep it separate. So once we've gone through steps 1 and 2, where we've identified your core wounds and the related events in your timeline, what we're going to do is look at which ones create a physiological response in your body. And we will do this via the review of your timeline while paying attention to how your body responds while viewing it. The same feelings that you experience in reviewing those memories and events will be the same ones experienced within a trauma bond, since they carry a biochemical component around the release of serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline. Anyone who's experienced a trauma bond knows it literally feels that you are emotionally and physically addicted to this person in the relationship. There are certain feelings of like you literally feel sick at the thought of losing them or being without them. And what we want to do is address that because in that moment, your body is being hijacked by your nervous system. We're going to go into all of that. Okay. So I wanted to give you an example of what this looks like. So many of you have heard me talk about Kate on Instagram. Kate is our imaginary case study that we keep, that I will occasionally create stories around. Okay. So you're going to see a story about her later on in the presentation about she and Todd. All right. So for example, in that, like in her example later on in the presentation, while aware that she struggles with an abandonment wound, the same feelings that she experienced as a child when her father walked out on her family are the same feelings that she experiences with her partners when they abruptly leave, ghost, or abandon the relationship. Since this is painful for her and it's gone unresolved, she will engage in repetitive compulsion until she finds resolution. This is also her brain's way of keeping her safe with people and situations it knows how to navigate. Even though it's toxic, even though it's messy, your brain will always default to what's familiar. All right. And this is in addition to her unconscious mind's drive to make her whole again by finding people to repeat the cycle until it's healed. Again, this is known as repetitive compulsion. However, once conscious of this process, she no longer has to recruit partners to play the role of the father who abandoned her. All right. So getting back to creating physiological safety, your task is to heal your body's physiological response to these unresolved relational traumas so that you don't continue to seek out relationships to recreate your early emotional wounds. When your partner's behavior reminds you of the past and painful emotions rise, you're in effect reliving that original event over and over again, which equals feeling unsafe. This can mean anxious, stressed, fearful, panicked. And this is also because this part of your brain has no sense of time. It doesn't know that the original event isn't happening right now in the moment. It just sees similar event right now, and it just conjures up the previous feelings that you experienced in order to keep you safe so that you will jump into fight or flight mode and do something that will in effect keep you safe. Okay. So you in effect go into a phase of the relationship where it's difficult to leave because of the abuse, right? You have this compulsion to stay and fight for your early unmet needs through the core wounding that you've experienced. And this is why we feel attached and unable to leave. You may also see this referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, which is the inability to leave an abusive situation due to identifying with your abuser and choosing to stay. You're identifying with them. Here's the thing. You are identifying with them because they feel like home, where the original wounding began. Okay, I want you to let that sit in for a minute because a lot of us tend to romanticize not being able to leave a messy relationship. We're like, oh, this means that we're supposed to be together. We're just long lost soulmates. That's not the case. You're identifying with them. You feel attached to them, literally because they feel like home. Well, for many of us, home wasn't a safe place. And this is why we have to be careful about the attachments that we develop to different people that come into our lives within abusive situations. All right. So remember, as long as you have this physiological response, your brain and unconscious mind will seek relationships to recreate and replay this so that you can master it because the response has been deemed a threat. At the heart of healing trauma is feeling safe. You will not feel safe within yourself and your relationships as long as your body is being hijacked by your nervous system, which is based on emotional pain from the past showing up as triggers today. All right. So, as I said, step 3 is a big one. Okay. Now we're going to go on to step 4, which is creating relational safety. As survivors of relational trauma, you're likely to have several unsafe relationships outside of your romantic partners. This can look like platonic friends, they can look like family members, they can look like coworkers. They can be different people with whom you are in a messy, abusive relationship with, but you find it hard to disentangle yourself from them. All right. But here's the deal. In order for us to create relational safety, we have to develop the relationship with ourselves. And we do that through radical self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, meeting our unmet needs, creating better boundaries, as well as the development of self-love. All right. The creation of new and or redefining existing relationships will facilitate the healing process. All right. I cannot stress to you how important feeling safe within our bodies and also within our relationships are when we are healing trauma. Step 5, which is the final step, is called the heart and inner work. This has to do with inner child work, which addresses the unresolved emotional wounding. This is also going to talk about journaling and expressive writing, which works to rewire your brain's response to trauma, as well as meditation and visualizations to facilitate emotional mastery. And remember, steps 3, 4, and 5 will be in a separate video from this video. All right, so let's get started. You've probably all seen this quote around the internet, which I really like because I feel like it gives us a really neat overview of how we all experience trauma bonds. It's easy for us to like go to Wikipedia or the dictionary and like, come up with the clinical definition of trauma bonding. But I believe in describing your experiences as you experience them so that it can just like finally click for you. All right. So trauma bonding is when you're so heavily attached to a toxic person that you're willing to maintain the relationship even at the expense of yourself for the few and far between highs. All right. Your brain gets highly addicted to the habitual ups and downs of oxytocin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin that even when the relationship ends, you will seek and crave the person or become obsessive or seek similar people in order to get your fix. The loss of their presence makes you crave them and become more dependent in the same way that an addict is to their drug of choice. We romanticize this, but this is a destructive bond that will not end well. All right. So let's get into what trauma bond red flags look like. You self-abandon, you self-betray, and sacrifice your boundaries in order to stay in the abusive relationship. The sex is often too good to give up, but the abuse is too bad to stay. There's a predictable cycle of the pursuer, distancer, runner, chaser, anxious, avoidant dynamics mixed in with emotional, verbal, or physical abuse that you find difficult to leave. All right. The shared trauma deepens the attachment, making them your quote unquote best friend, soulmate, or twin flame within a matter of days or weeks. You've lost your self-esteem and self-worth in order to meet their needs emotionally, sexually, and or financially. You've endured so much abuse that you think it's normal. Meanwhile, your friends and family worry that you're in denial. And you defend your partner's behavior because you are in denial and you've stopped listening to your intuition. Also, keep in mind that denial is the opposite of intuition. So whenever we're steeped and marinating in denial, we are not able to hear our intuition. All right. So this denial, it enables you to remain attached to the fantasy of who they could be versus the reality of who they are and have been to you, which is chronically abusive. All right. So whenever I'm discussing trauma bonds, like just in a nutshell, right? I believe that trauma bonds are created when we have a traumatic event in childhood, meaning that there's some sort of emotional or relational trauma that's happened. Couple that with the lack of resolution around this trauma and the emotional wounds. What happens then later on in life, we will enter into an emotionally addictive cycle where we engage in this unconscious effort to find resolution of these emotional wounds via some of our relationships. And again, trauma bonds aren't only limited to romantic relationships. They do tend to be related to, we do tend to find them showing up as well in platonic friendships, and they also show up in workplace relationships as well. All right. So this is a graphic that I created because I really wanted to give you an overview, a pictorial overview of what they look like and how they begin. So let's say that this girl's name is Kate, right? As you can see, Kate's dad right here. Okay, Kate's mom was hypercritical of her looks and her weight. She was verbally abusive when Kate was growing up, still is. She was also emotionally absent and pretty neglectful to Kate while she was a child. Okay, so Kate's dad, he was physically abusive to her. He abandoned the family. He was rarely affectionate. He was often angry and emotionally volatile. So this results in Kate, who we have right here. Kate struggles with low self-worth, right? And she's hypersensitive to criticism. And she also struggles with some abandonment wounds, which we're going to be visiting later on in the presentation. You can imagine, based on how she was parented growing up by her mom and dad, that these are just some of the issues that she struggled with. But here's the thing. Here's how, based on the way that Kate was parented, right? Look at her adult relationships right here, right? Her adult relationships are indicative of the things that she went through as a child. And so, relationship number one, right? She was in a relationship where, she was trying to fix them and people pleasing in order to have their approval. Okay. That relates back to Kate's mother because she was often hypercritical of Kate. All right. So, the relationship number two, where she dated verbally abusive men. She dated this person who was also emotionally unavailable. And this person would also ghost her for weeks after an argument. We're actually going to be talking about this person later on in the presentation as well. Relationship number three, this is where her partner love bombed her, idolized and then discarded her. And she found it hard to leave, so she stayed holding on, waiting for him to come back. You can imagine that that number three relationship has a lot to do with her father. The first relationship has to do with both of her parents. So as you can see, depending on the person that she meets and chooses to be with, this will relate back to one or both of her parents. All right. So I went a little bit deeper into what trauma bonds are, attachments, and entanglements. And we're going to go into the official definitions of attachments and entanglements in a few slides. All right. So with regards to Kate's situation and just in general with trauma bonds, self-betrayal and self-abandonment are needed to maintain the relationship. When you find that you have to betray yourself and abandon your needs in order to maintain the relationship, this is a trauma bond. All right. We also find that when you're trying to fix and or people please the person in order to gain their approval, that's something that we see commonly within trauma bonds. All right. There's often a feast and famine around approval and rejection, which fuels the sexual chemistry and this increases a physiological addiction. A lot of us will say, well, the sex with that ex was just the best. Well, no, not necessarily. It's because you're often being deprived of emotional and physical connection in those relationships. So when you finally do have sex with them, it feels like you are feasting when in fact they've just been starving you for that emotional and physical connection. That's why it feels so good, right? It's not necessarily that sex is so awesome. It's that if you go on a fast for 1 to 2 weeks, by the time you're ready to eat, you're gonna feel like, oh my God, regardless of what you're eating, even if it's bread and butter, it's gonna taste like the best bread and butter you've ever had. All right. So your trauma bonds are also reinforced by the love and hate dynamic, right? You've probably heard me talk about the wounding and soothing process that we tend to go through from childhood all the way through adulthood. This is even reinforced in some of our platonic relationships and especially our workplace relationships. All right. So if you tend to feel incomplete without your partner, that's a factor within trauma bonds. Your relationship tends to mirror unresolved childhood wounds, as we see above with Kate. All right. So you may also find that you're walking on eggshells to keep things peaceful in a relationship, because there's chronic emotional abuse. All right. The inability to leave the relationship due to emotional and physiological addiction is also a hallmark of trauma bonds. Your self-worth is also connected to your partner's approval or disapproval. There's also a volatile roller coaster of emotions, right? So you become hyper aware of the uncertainties and changes in the relationship. And this has to do a lot of the time with anxious folks. However, believe it or not, avoidants are also hyper aware of uncertainties and changes in relationships as well. They're just more passive in addressing it, whereas anxiously attached folks they tend to be more overtly aggressive in addressing those issues. Finally, within trauma bonds, there's this insatiable need for your partner to choose you over others. A lot of us are always in trauma bonds. We're trying to get that person to choose us over a partner, over work, over time with their friends, you just can't realize that this person will not ever choose you. And so you embark on this journey to try to fix them so that they will choose you. And these are all indicators of trauma bonds. Now, are there others? Absolutely, right? However, these are the main hallmarks that we see within trauma bonds. All right. Let's go into attachments, because attachments and entanglements are near constant companions of trauma bonds, right? So a lot of the time we'll say, well, I feel so attached to this person. I can't leave them. I don't know what it is. I keep on thinking about them. I can't be without them. This is really because you're trying to secure unmet needs from childhood within the relationship. And there's a part of you that will feel desperate to keep the person around in order to unconsciously secure unmet needs. The reality is this, though, this is an unconscious process. You are not aware of this, right? The problem is this: we romanticize this process and it makes us feel like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be with this person because I can't keep them off my mind. And we'll see a lot of even social media memes around this, right? If they don't call you back within 3 days after the breakup, they never wanted to be with you anyway. No, that person's probably just walking away, and that's fine. However, whether it's with that other person or with you, if you find yourself constantly going back to that person, there's a part of you that's engaged in actually repetitive compulsion, because you're trying to get some unmet childhood needs within the relationship. And that's why you feel so inexplicably like just attached to them. Okay. Entanglements. Entanglements are the specific behaviors that both sides execute and engage in order to maintain the relationship. As we've discussed, trauma bonded relationships are a power struggle, right? The anxious avoidant, the pursuer distancer. And so, how do we execute this? We execute this with people pleasing, which is about trying to gain control via approval, right? Manipulation, again, control, and abuse. And there are other ways that we engage in entanglements as well, but those tend to be the main ones. All right. Entanglements create an imbalance of power within the relationship, such that it doesn't even mean that you guys are actually in a relationship with each other. It's just so imbalanced that it makes a relationship impossible, because at different points there's just this emotional tug of war that's happening, right? If you've ever been in a relationship where it's a pursuer distancer, anxious avoidant type of relationship, you understand where and you can probably see where you've engaged in some entanglements designed to kind of like keep that person around, or they've engaged in some entanglements designed to keep you around or to keep the power balance on their side. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So if one of your parents, looking at Kate, displayed volatility growing up, then it explains why the chemistry that you have with this person feels so intense, familiar, and like home when you initially meet them with a similar level of volatility. It isn't that this person's your soulmate if you're getting into these chronically abusive relationships. It means that your brain interprets this familiarity as home. And this is why we have to make sure that whenever we meet someone, right, and the relationship starts to get messy, we have to start looking at, how does this mirror some of my own childhood wounding? What's really happening here? And this is why we are engaged now in the process of trying to become whole and conscious. Because prior to this, we will often function in a way where it's kind of like we're asleep. And this is why we look at this as your awakening, okay? We can't unsee this stuff once we awaken. You can try, right? But the lessons become more and more painful at that point, all right? So for the person involved in this situation, if they can secure the love they missed, then all is well. This is the heart of repetitive compulsion. This is the drive to repeat the past so that you can master it today. And again, during the soothing phase, you've experienced their ability early on to be loving, nurturing, which creates good feelings of relief. Your brain's goal is to secure that familiar feeling at all costs, even if it means risking your self-esteem and your mental health. And obviously, this isn't logical. It's not healthy. And it's why we're tasked to consciously recognize our own wounding in childhood, because we will unconsciously repeat these and replay these situations from the past until we find resolution. What makes trauma bonds so devastating is the addictive, painful cycle of old emotional pain. But it's also the same thing that makes them equally addicting and difficult to break. If you're in this kind of situation with a similar history, then you might have the tendency to fix and fawn, which means to be good, be the nice girl syndrome, or do the nice girl syndrome in your relationships, right? In the way you did with your mother or your father as a child. So healing is learning how to walk away from emotional volatility in these situations as you could not as a child. Remember, before we come into our awakening, we are largely functioning from our inner child, right? We're making decisions from that place. And so as we heal, we awaken and we allow the highest and best version of ourselves to evolve. We allow that part of us to rise. And so this is why it's so important that we go through the awakening, the conscious process of learning to love ourselves so that we can learn to love others properly as well. All right. So doing this gives your brain the evidence that it needs to understand that you can be safe without that kind of connection. This will be a conscious process, right? Because your conscious mind starts making healthier decisions in your relationships while avoiding toxic situations. All right. So the cycle of wounding and soothing. We experience this in childhood. This looks like the spanking, yelling, teasing, the emotional absence of one of our parents, the volatility, the timeouts, and all that, right? All serve as a gateway to trauma. And I know that quite a few of you will probably disagree with this, but this is what we're finding, all right? Inevitably, we experience this soothing from our parents or peers in the form of, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. This is for your own good. I love you. I didn't mean to. Right? Think about how good we feel when we get that apology. This is why we're just on this search for closure in these relationships, because we're looking for the soothing aspect, right? And so we seek these apologies really intensely because it's a familiar feeling of resolution we perhaps did not receive as children. Many of our parents, in terms of like the abuse that we experienced, did not say, hey, I'm sorry. A lot of us are still struggling with even coming to term with those wounds ourselves, let alone being able to confront our parents and then have our parents say, hey, I'm so sorry. Because more than likely, they were doing the best that they could with the tools that they had at the time. And so they probably see what they were doing as just, hey, that's just what happens. That's how I was raised and that's how I raised you. And so because we can't get it from them, whether or not we've tried to get it from them, we work now unconsciously to get it from our partners later on in life. All right. So again, I said to you earlier that we would be talking about what attachments actually look like. So relationship attachments are based on the unresolved trauma which manifests in your relationship as fears of abandonment, for example, unmet expectations, and dependency. Unconsciously, you require your partner to resolve these issues by fulfilling unmet needs from childhood because you won't or you can't. This is what makes it hard to let go of the person and the relationship while also romanticizing not being able to let go. This is because the attachment is grounded in dependency while masquerading as love because of the familiar feelings. Again, we tend to romanticize not being able to let go of them. We tend to romanticize it as being, oh my God, this means I'm really, really in love with this person because I just can't really seem to let go of them, right? Understand that when we look at love versus attachment, love honors who you are, right? It holds space for you. It appreciates. Whereas attachments are filled with obligations, demands, unmet needs, and it needs to possess in order to have these unmet needs fulfilled. All right. You'll find it hard to leave the person because you don't realize that unconsciously you are engaged in this struggle and this battle to get whatever it is that you needed in childhood, and you're trying to get it from this person. So if you meet a guy and, he's a great provider, but he's also abusive, right? Let's just say you had a father he's a great provider, but he was emotionally absent. And whenever he was around, he was angry and abusive. Your struggle in this relationship will be to find love and acceptance that you did not have with your father. And your brain desperately wants to feel safe in this relationship. So therefore it will it will execute this plan with your unconscious mind to try to force this person into that role of your father if you're not careful. Okay. This is why healthy detachment in relationships are so key. All right. So let's talk about entanglements. Entanglements, as we discussed earlier, are the destructive habits of each person, and they create traps and snares, making it impossible for you to leave the relationship, right? So this can look like manipulation, control, deception, intermittent love, and gaslighting, right? You know, gaslighting is manipulation designed to force you into questioning your own memory and experience of whatever's happening at the moment, right? These entanglements create an imbalance of power, making a healthy, balanced relationship impossible in a relationship. So I want you to think about, what sort of attachments have you had in your relationships? And you'll be able to really figure this out when we get into the exercises later in this video. But I also want you to consider what your attachments have looked like and what entanglements have you experienced from other people and what entanglements have you engaged in, right? Because we have to remember that even though our partners may have been awful to us, we also have a role as well. We also have to look at what we bring to the table and what are some of the messy things that we may have done in the relationship as well. Because even though many of us have experienced narcissistic abuse, what we also want to look at is and understand is that codependency, narcissistic abuse, they're two sides of the same coin, right? And so what sort of entanglements, again, have you engaged in? What sort of attachments have you had in the relationship as well? Because your partners have their own attachments and they also have their own entanglements that they've engaged in the relationship as well. Okay. So again, attachments and entanglements are the near constant companions of trauma bonds. All right. So let's get into now the pre-work required in this phase. Many of you have seen, if you have been with us from the beginning or you've just kind of worked with me through the Loving Me After We challenge, this is going to be very familiar material to you. And this is because the decision, the declaration, and the commitment worksheets, you'll hear me refer to them as DDC. They are foundational exercises. You will probably see me refer to them within each masterclass, right? And this is because they're super important regardless of the topic that we're discussing. All right. So I'll give you a tip. It behooves you to complete the decision, the declaration, and the commitment worksheets so that as you go through future master classes, you will already have that work done. All right. So the decision to shift from a victim to a healing mindset facilitates personal mastery, which increases self-reliance, the ability to handle challenges while also embracing acceptance. All right. So here's the thing, all that sounds great, but you're probably really scared right now, right? And I get that. You should be, because you're probably unsure of the journey ahead of you. And in some ways, again, you should be. That tells me that you understand the gravity about what's about to happen here, because you're about to engage in a discovery of yourself, your early childhood wounding, and it's also the relationships that you've been through. Right. And so all of these are going to at some point cause you to want to just abandon this process. That's why in order for anything to change in our lives, we have to make the decision. Just like you probably saw either a friend recommended this program to you, or you saw some posts on Instagram or Facebook and you had to make the decision, I'm going to go click on this link and join this masterclass. You made a decision and now you're here today. In order for us to heal, in order for us to change, we have to make certain decisions. And that decision has to be conscious to us every single day. All right. So the decision right now hanging in the balance is whether or not you're ready to shift old patterns of relating, essentially birthing a new woman, right? She is the best version of herself. She is the woman that's ready to learn how to love herself above all else. She's ready to face old wounds that created toxic patterns of relating in the past. And in this moment, you've decided that you've chosen this path to healing. You are also declaring your decision while also committing to the process. Because let's be honest here, you will be again compelled to face certain truths about yourself, your childhood, your parents, and your relationships. And that can be difficult. And ultimately, you'll need to commit to seeing yourself through this commitment, right? You need to see yourself, make the decision that you're going to see yourself through the end, because it's super easy to get excited initially, right? You see the title, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to finally heal this. But look, the first challenge is going to come up and you're going to be like, yeah, I don't feel like doing this anymore. This is too hard. I don't know why. I don't want to do the timeline. Ginger, I don't want to do I don't want to do another downward spiral. I don't want to discover my core unmet wounds because this hurts too much, and you'll just want to give up. It is the hardest decision that you will make, and then to commit to this journey because perhaps you were never taught the value of putting yourself first. Codependency requires that we self abandon. It requires that we self betray in order to put the needs of others before us. And so, this is why this decision is so important for you. And this is why I want to underscore this in each and every masterclass that we have, simply because it will require you to consciously become aware of what it is that you are changing and what it is that you are deciding to do. All right. So the decision worksheet, the attachment, there's an attachment to this presentation. It's called the decision worksheet. It's also in the downloads library and resources section of the portal. So you'll find it there as well. All right, so let's get into the declaration to heal. So now that you've decided that it's time to change and commit yourself, right? It's time to declare this to those around you. And lucky for you, you're already engaged in that, right? So here's what this is going to look like, though. It's going to look like turning down dates with the typical guy that you go out with, right? Making conscious decisions to stop entertaining certain toxic relationships and situations. And many of us know what that is. Like if we're here, you more than likely understand some of your patterns already. Right? So, but what does this look like? For some of my clients, this meant, deleting their presence on dating apps, right? We need to get off of Bumble, Tinder, Match. What is that one called? Something Harmony. And here's the thing. Those all maintain the addiction we have to attention and feeling special. That's why when you have like my one-on-one clients, I tell them you need to get off the apps, right? Because that maintains the addiction to being seen, chosen, and feeling special. Because at this point in time, we are working on feeling seen, chosen, and special within ourselves. We're not looking at that. We're not looking at securing that outside of ourselves, okay? So it also means clearing your inboxes of the stragglers and the sex in a jar is ready to pounce when you're feeling lonely. We all know those people, right? Those people that we can call to come over. We can have a little romp for the night or the weekend, and then they exit, right? We need to clear ourselves of those folks, put them on block and delete, all right? So this also means blocking and deleting the ex from your phone, not stalking them on social media, because a lot of us tend to keep the door open, right? And this will almost guarantee, this is why your exes show up while you're healing, right? They feel when your energy changes. It's almost like they can feel when your energy shifts away from them and they just pop up, right? And this is how you're going to make your declaration to yourself, by turning away. So this looks like deleting, blocking, and going no contact. No contact also means not stalking their social media. All right. So your journey to self-love, right, up until now has been living from the unconscious wounds of childhood, right? Now you have to declare to yourself and someone you trust that will keep you accountable what it is that you're up to. Now, lucky for you, your presence here among the women in the inner circle membership is your declaration, and they will keep you honest and they will keep you accountable. This is what I love about our group, because we are heavy on the support, but we are also heavy on the spice, and we will help keep you honest. We will keep you accountable. So in terms of your declaration, you're already here. You're making that declaration already. All right. So again, check the attachments to the presentation for the declaration worksheet. All right. So let's go into the last of this part, which is the commitment to heal. I want you to ask yourself, how ready are you to commit to yourself? Love yourself. Put yourself first, even when you don't feel like it, even when you feel like I'm going to lose this person, I'm going to lose this connection if I assert my boundaries, if I assert whatever it is that I need to do in order to keep myself safe. How ready are you to do that, right? You're going to be battling a lot of resistance from your inner little girl, from your past, from your ego, as well as your shadow parts, because again, familiarity means safety to your brain, and you will want to keep that going at all costs. All right. You'll come up with all the reasons as to why you shouldn't have to change. Maybe you'll rationalize some of your behavior in order to give yourself permission in order to keep engaging in them. right? There might also be the random ex you've been pining for that pops up asking you for a second chance. And here's the thing, the last person who ghosted you only to take you down the rabbit hole of abandonment and rejection, they'll show up too. Right? Again, this is because your energy changes. And whether you want to look at it as like the universe is, testing you, the person senses that your energy changes. Here's the thing, when you've made the decision, you've declared this decision, and now you're committed to yourself, none of this matters, right? You're committed to yourself. So that random ex, the person who ghosted and abandoned you, left you just in a state of like, oh my God, and despair because, now you're feeling abandoned, you're feeling rejected. We are committing to ourselves at this point. We're no longer looking right now at this point for outside validation and acceptance. What we're doing is we are going within. All right. So we're going to avoid all of this by committing to yourself and by default, this process. All right. Once you commit, here's what happens. Like magic, the doors to better understanding of your patterns open up. All the stuff that you once resisted, the insights, the awareness, all of that stuff deepens, right? The connections to your past are made and the acceptance of the present circumstances is now possible, right? It is a beautiful thing when you go through your timeline and you realize, oh my God, so this is why I've been dating this type of person for this long. Like, oh my God. And it just feels so good because now you understand it. This is a thing. This not only happens to me, it happens to other people. And I understand now that this is something that I actually have control over and I can actually fix this for myself, right? I can heal this aspect of how I relate to other people. And so I promise you, once you commit this journey, it'll feel hard. But when you actually commit, it actually does, in some ways, it gets easier because the emotional work gets sweeter because you engage in this discovery, this rediscovery of yourself, and you're back in control. And you get to now develop a self-love that rivals Mount Everest. Okay, so for this part, you're going to be looking for the attachment to the presentation for the commitment worksheet. All right, so let's get into some of our process here in step 2. All right, we're going to be talking about in this step discovering your core wounds and unmet needs. All right, so get your notebooks, and if you want to pause the presentation while you either print out the notes section from your masterclass workbook, or if you just want to take notes, you should definitely be doing that at this point. All right, so let's talk about core wounds and unmet needs. Your core wounds and unmet needs are the unresolved emotional trauma of the past that repeat themselves throughout each of your relationships. They're also the most painful, frequent complaints and triggers in your relationships. You may also find that they are the common threads in all of your relationships. For example, abandonment was something that, if you've probably listened to maybe the first masterclass, I talked about the fact that abandonment was something that I used to struggle with. Just like it was an awful thing for me to struggle with because I would know that I need to leave someone, but not really want to because it mirrored the issue that I had with my father passing away unexpectedly. Every single time I went to break up with someone, or I knew that I had to break up with someone, it became this really, really painful process because in my mind, me saying goodbye to this person it was the same feeling that I had of loss of saying goodbye to my father. And it was a wound. I just didn't want to keep opening up that wound. But I kept dating men that were going to abandon me anyway because they were not equipped, right, with the right tools, and neither was I. And so for me, one of my core wounds was abandonment. Okay. And so this is because each core wound is connected to a traumatic memory from your past. For me, it was my father passing away unexpectedly when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And so your brain strings them together like Lego building blocks in order to justify the belief, because as long as you do, this keeps you safe. So these core wounds serve as emotional walls to intimacy, which keep you from allowing love in. For me, what that looked like was simply dating people who were going to abandon me, right? There was no way that we were going to have an emotionally intimate relationship where I felt seen and heard because they were emotionally unavailable and ultimately would abandon the relationship, right? So in my choice of this type of person, right, I was erecting these emotional walls because I wasn't going to choose someone at the time who was going to be able to love me. I wanted to choose someone in my effort, my unconscious effort at the time, to replay that old childhood wound. Right. And so I had to get to a point where I was conscious of this and then started making better choices in my relationships. All right. So let's take a look at the core wounds and unmet needs building blocks. Here you'll find with this person, right? So everyone leaves. No one wants me, right? I've given this example of, say, Kate, right? Because this is one of Kate's core wounds. Everyone leaves. No one wants or loves me, right? So let's start at the bottom, down here at the bottom left. So Kate's father left after divorce happened, right? 15 years ago. And he doesn't speak to her or any of her siblings, right? Her mom became depressed and never made time for her or her siblings after the father left, right? So the next thing is, after the divorce, she says here that her grandparents stopped visiting for the holidays and she rarely heard from them. Abandonment, right? As you can see with Kate's father leaving, that's abandonment. With mom becoming depressed and emotionally absent, that's abandonment. Now we move over to the far right. Her best friend moved away, so she didn't have anyone to talk to after that, because remember, she was a child going through divorce. Her best friend was a source of, love for her, love and acceptance, someone that she could talk to. And so once this best friend moved away, she never really kept in touch with her. Again, that's another note of loss and abandonment for Kate. Let's see here. Now, above that, she feels that she was never chosen for any sports team that she tried out for in school. And so she felt that she was rejected because she's shy and she never really talked to anyone. She never really she didn't really know how to feel really social with the team whenever she was trying out with them. The other memory and experience noted here is that her mother never realized that she was being abused at the babysitter because she never paid attention to me. If you remember just earlier, we were talking about how Kate's mother was emotionally absent and distant from her. And so during this time, she was being abused at the babysitter as well. And so again, this is about the childhood sexual abuse and molestation and or emotional abandonment and physical abandonment as well. The next one here is she tried calling her father for her birthday, but he hung up on her when she called. And I think that's a really painful thing for any child to experience. Now, in her college years, her boyfriend cheated, then he ghosted her, said he never really loved her. That would harken back to, again, her father leaving the relationship or leaving her family. Okay. The next one is she dated a guy who ghosted her whenever they had an argument. And that is Todd. That is the guy that we're going to be discussing, who's one of her partners later on in this presentation. All right. So looking at these building blocks of her core wounds, remember I said that your brain strings these together in order to support the belief that it has, right? So Kate's belief here is that everyone leaves. No one wants or loves me, right? These circumstances below that top core wounds block, it creates the recipe for future trauma bonding. Because now Kate will recruit a new partner to replay her old childhood wounds, which we see all here, right? In order to search and try to figure out how to get them met, right, in the relationship. And again, this is known as repetitive compulsion, which sets the stage for trauma bonding by choosing partners who repeat the cycle of old emotional wounds. All right. So what are some of Kate's unmet needs? She lacked parental mirroring, right? She didn't have parents who saw her, who validated her, who made her feel loved and cherished, right? For example, I used to work with foster children, and one of the things I would do with the biological parents is work with them on parental mirroring. So, for example, if your kid is at the playground, right? And you have two choices as a parent. If your child skins their knee, right? You can say, "Get out of my face. What are you crying for? Just go put your knee under the water and just get over it. You'll be fine," right? Or you will mirror their pain in that moment, right? If they're crying, you're upset too. And you're saying, "Oh my gosh, what happened? Oh, this is so awful. I'm so," and you're empathizing with them, showing them that you understand their pain. A lot of the times in abusive situations as in childhood growing up, we don't have parents who are emotionally present with us. Whether or not they're volatile or they're absent, they're not emotionally available to us. So parental mirroring isn't happening. However, parental mirroring is so incredibly important when raising our children because it helps them it helps them to feel seen, valued, heard, and cherished, right? Think about how we choose partners who do not do these things for us. It's because many times, whether or not it was over a prolonged period of time or just a specific period of time, we did not have, or our parents did not engage in parental mirroring with us. All right. So some other unmet needs for Kate: validation, connection, acceptance, love, and a caregiver being able to validate and hold space for her grief after the divorce and her dad's absence. I will also add a caregiver that would have discovered that she was being sexually abused at the babysitter, and to be able to save her, rescue her, remove her from that situation as well. Okay, so this is why it's really important for us to understand our unmet needs, because we will have these unmet needs, right? They will remain an unconscious issue for us, and we will seek to repeat them and get those needs met in our relationships. And this is how trauma bonds start. All right. So, what do core wounds and unmet needs look like? They look like negative beliefs, thoughts, and feelings that you hold about yourself in relationships. And identifying and becoming aware of them and gaining insight into your unmet needs and core wounds helps you understand where your trauma bonds lie, even before you meet the person. All right, and we're going to talk about that. So, if one of your core wounds and core beliefs lies within a realm of abandonment, then you will unconsciously, again, choose partners who abandon and reject you repeatedly and find it difficult to exit the relationship due to this trauma bond, due to this attachment to needing to have this need around acceptance met. All right, so for example, let's talk about Kate. Story time. Kate and Todd have been dating for about 10-ish weeks now. If you've been in our Facebook group, then you understand the significance of 10 to 16 weeks. 10 to 16 weeks tends to be the period at which people drop their masks, right? People they can't really play the game for longer than 10 to 16 weeks, right? So she's at that point where, okay, so Todd's feeling himself a little bit, and he's going to start showing her who he really is, right? So she's been engaged in some work on herself. So she's quite aware of her own abandonment wound. And one evening after a date, she and Todd have a disagreement, which results in him ghosting her for about 10 days. But here's the thing. They reconcile after about 2 weeks, but they never discuss the issue in detail. How many of us have done that, right? We're just happy for the person to come back. So we're just like, okay, he's back. I'm not going to talk about it, right? So, but here's the thing. They have another argument while at the local county fair where, they went on a date. But while walking back to his car in a huff, he pulls off without her, right? So devastated, she calls her brother to pick her up and take her home. Right. So during the time that Kate and Todd are apart after his last departure, she journals about her experiences with Todd, how abrupt the departures made her feel, and how this relates to her core wounding. Right. Remember, her core wounding is around, or one of them is around abandonment. And so she realizes that unless Todd is actively engaged in his own work, he will continue to abandon her should they enter into another disagreement again and continue the relationship. Right. And this is problematic for Kate because continuing to accept this behavior means ripping open old wounds, and continued acceptance opens the door to a trauma bond with him. And she doesn't want that. So, of course, he calls her back to apologize for his behavior, and she accepts it. But here's the thing. She tells Todd that one of her boundaries and needs in a relationship is for her partner not to abandon ship when problems arise. And for that reason, she wished him luck in finding a partner better suited for his needs. How many of us have made the opposite decision every time someone ghosted us after an argument? Many of us here have, right? Or they've done something egregious and we're just like, oh God, I want them back. Because again, during our time apart from them, we're going through that physiological change. We're going through we physically miss them. We feel physically addicted to them and they're not there, right? And again, this is why we're going to be talking about the physiological aspect of trauma bonds, because this is what creates the anxiety. This is about where the panic comes in. This is where the stress comes in. And this is why we need to figure out how to extinguish that. All right. So had Kate continued to accept the behavior from Todd, what do you think would have happened? We're going to discuss this during the live workshop, because I know that so many of us have made the decision, I've made that decision before in the past, right? And it's something that we have to know. Here's the thing. We have to understand that we don't always have to go down the path of writing this out with them. We can see certain red flags in the beginning and believe them. It's okay for us to see where in a situation like Kate's where both times where he walked away from her, he left her at the fair, he ghosted her for 10 days without discussing what happened. That's a problem, right? Because that's someone that does not understand necessarily how to handle conflict in a relationship. And if he's abandoning her now, unless he's doing some of his own work, he will continue to do that in a relationship. And what will happen is she will enter into a really nasty trauma bond with him because she will engage in desperate moves in order to keep him around. And that's where the danger lies in dating someone like that for Kate. All right. So here's where the work begins. I want you to write a list of your most consistent issues and unmet needs in your adult relationships, right? I've already created a worksheet. A worksheet for you within the masterclass workbook. So you can actually start that there, okay? So on that worksheet, I want you to include the relationships that were difficult to leave and the ones that where you consistently fought over the same issue or an issue consistently came up that was never resolved or the most painful issue for you in that relationship. And I want you to think about how do these issues mirror those from your childhood. Once you complete the life timelines in the next section, this will become more apparent. And for those of you who've already completed the life timeline, you're good. For those of you who are new to us or you haven't completed the timeline, now's the time to get started. Okay, so you probably want to complete your life timeline before you complete the Discovering Your Unmet Needs worksheet. And let's see here. This is somewhat what the worksheet looks like. It's going to be inside your masterclass workbook, just so you know. All right. So once you've completed the timeline, once you've completed the worksheet, I want you to take some time to sit with what you've discovered. All right. I want you to consider the role of your core wounds and your unmet needs as a child and how they show up today in all of your relationships. Because via repetitive compulsion, you're going to be engaged in a desperate need to get those needs filled, right? And once you start to engage in this like desperate need in order to get those needs filled, right? That's where your trauma bonds are going to start. Okay. So your awareness of this will bring forth the insights which serve as a catalyst for change in your relationships. For example, if your father was dismissive of your needs physically and emotionally available as a child, then you might be prone to a relationship with a partner who does the same to you because, again, you're going to be engaged in this process of trying to get these needs met. And even if this person treats you awfully, your attachment to needing these things met or these needs met in a relationship will keep you there, right? And the entanglement part of it is the behavior that you're engaged in order to do so, in order to switch the control. So we talk about auditioning, performing, people pleasing, for example. This also looks like for those of us who've dated people who were like rehab projects, trying to fix them, right? We try to gain approval, right, of these people by engaging in subtly controlling or manipulative behaviors. And so some of us don't realize that we're doing this. This is largely an unconscious process. So this really isn't your fault. I need to underscore that. It isn't your fault. These are just unconscious processes that you are engaged in because your unconscious mind's goal is to get you holy. It's just not necessarily the healthiest way for us to get, to do this. And that's why we have to get conscious about our wounding. We have to get conscious about the decisions that we're making in our relationships. All right. So the goal here is to become aware of your wounds and unmet needs so that you can start to engage in the necessary work to heal. Even if you haven't healed from them yet, your conscious awareness of them will allow you to make different decisions when they show up in potential partners and relationships. So with Kate's situation, she's not necessarily healed from her abandonment wound. She's just right now aware of them, and she's making different decisions not to engage with people who would abandon her at the first sight of a problem, right? Because what she wants to know is that, hey, if there's a problem, we can talk it out. But if this person's just liable to just ghost and leave her wherever they are at the time, like he left her at the county fair, that's not really someone that she wants to really be in a relationship with, right? So this is why it's so important for us to understand that the healing process is ongoing, right? Right now, I just need you to be aware of what's going on so that and then just start to make better decisions, different decisions, right? Even if it hurts to walk away from them, make the decision to do so. If someone starts to yell and curse you out, well, that's a red flag. It's time to leave, right? It's time to just say, yeah, this is not how I want to be treated in the relationship. It might hurt to walk away. We might think, oh, well, I wouldn't want someone to give up on me. Yeah, we don't want someone to give up on you. But if you're being abusive to someone, you're cursing them out, you are being awful to them, they should walk away. Just like you should walk away. Simply because we should not tolerate abuse. We should not be engaging in abuse of another person simply because we don't get what we want in the situation. Right? So with Todd, with yes, it's his right to walk away from her. It's his right to abandon the situation. He's fully within his rights to do so. Does that make him a healthy partner for Kate? That is the question. We will discuss that in the live workshop. All right. So I want you to journal your insights about this and or make a video to share with the group if you're inside the Facebook group. All right. So let's go over your timelines because again, I know that some of you might be new to the inner circle. And you may not be familiar with the life timeline exercise. Just like the DDC exercises, the decision, the declaration, and the commitment exercises, the life timelines are foundational exercises to the inner circle. You'll always hear me refer to DDC or the life timelines. And this is because it gives you so much insight into your history and how it's showing up today. All right. So this exercise, it's probably my favorite exercise because it's going to help you unpack the Pandora's box of your life, right? It helps you become aware of while processing all of the high points, low points, and turning point events in your life that are significant to you. Not that you think what should be significant to me, because a lot of people, whether they're working with me one-on-one or they're doing this in a group setting, they tend to think, well, what would Ginger think, or what would anyone else think is significant? No, this is about what's significant to you, right? Also, I need to say this as well. This isn't about trauma that we see on NCIS or Law and Order. This can be trauma that even you think isn't significant. You think, oh, well, it's significant to me, because that did hurt. But I don't think anyone else would think that's significant. If it's significant to you, it's significant. And that is what matters, right? Part of this exercise is helping you validate for yourself what was significant to you. All right. If you lived with your aunt because your parents couldn't take care of you when you were 10, it doesn't matter to me unless it matters to you. Okay. So that's what so we're looking at big trauma, which is life-threatening stuff. And we're looking at little trauma, which is all the other things which are non-life-threatening. All right. So I don't care if it's if Billy used to tease you on the playground. I don't care if your mother used to come late picking you up from after school every single day. If it's significant to you, I want you to write it down. Okay, so a copy of the blank template will be attached to this presentation. In the next slide, I want to give you an example of what the life timeline looks like. So this is an example of timeline I actually created a few years ago for my clients. And so this is kind of like what it looks like. It looks like age, situation, feelings. I want you to go back as far as you can. As far as you can. I don't care if you go back to age 10 or age 3. Everyone's different, right? So you're going to be giving me 3 to 5 events per decade of your life if you can. If you can't, that's okay too. I don't expect everyone to really remember every single moment the first go around, all right? So again, we're looking at high points, low points, turning points, events that are significant to you, not that you think would or should be significant to me, all right? So take a few moments to kind of bring this all in. I'm going to be including an example of what this looks like in the presentation, but I wanted to bring it into the presentation for those of you who aren't familiar with the live timeline. I want to stress that the timeline is going to be difficult for a lot of people, right? It's why with my one-on-one clients, sometimes with my office clients, I tend to want to have them do this in the office with me because I do know that it can be difficult, right? And so if you're doing it here in this within this masterclass, which you should be, right, understand it's going to be intense, right? You're going to be unearthing and pulling up all these old things, all these old wounds, right? All these unresolved situations from the past that you're aware of, but you haven't thought about them in a long time. All right. And so this can take, depending on your history, it could take a few hours or several days. Take your time. I want you to self-soothe and pace yourself if you start to feel overwhelmed. There's a section within the portal that goes over self-soothing tips that you can engage in. All right. And again, it's going to feel really, really hard, but I want to encourage you to keep your commitment and not abandon the process. If you need to put it down for a few hours or even a couple of days while you process, that's fine. Do not force yourself if you're feeling overwhelmed or flooded to complete the assignment, because you want this to be the kind of assignment where, you're not being distracted by how you're feeling about certain things. And again, it's natural for you to feel upset or just even resistant, especially, right? If you've been in the Facebook group, you know that a lot of the ladies are feeling a little resistant around the timeline, and this is absolutely normal. All right. So I want you to practice self-compassion, right? I do not expect you to sit down and do this in 15 minutes. This is not that assignment that you can sit and do in 15 minutes, okay? So this is why I want you to complete this assignment first before the unmet needs and core wounds assignment, right? Because you will actually get a lot of information from the timeline for your unmet needs and core wounds assignment. Okay, so once you have the information from both assignments, I want you to consider the parts that create a physiological response in your body and or brings up painful memories. These are the pain points where you are likely to struggle in relationships. Okay, so here's why. They're causing you emotional and physiological pain. Whenever you experience physiological pain, you're experiencing emotional and physiological pain at the same time. All right. Your brain sees this as a threat that it must extinguish and master. And together with your unconscious mind, it will execute a plan to find a partner to replay the issue in order to master it. All right. So this is why you make unconscious decisions in an attempt to replay the past by choosing and setting up partners or just other people to be your parents versus entering into the reparenting process with yourself. And so the familiarity inherent in these choices brings feelings of safety to your brain, along with the unconscious choices in partners in order to replay the past. It works to make you feel whole again. Okay. So until you wake up and make a conscious decision to heal, this will continue. All right. So this is why this is important. So the goal of your unconscious mind is to get and keep you whole. Your brain's job is to keep you safe. You will probably hear me refer to this part of your brain. This is a part of your brain that is tasked with keeping you safe. I tend to think of it as a blind, brainless tin man with a bat, right? There is no logic or reasoning necessarily behind it. Its job is just to keep you safe, right? And so your unconscious mind chooses people it deems acceptable to help you resolve an earlier resolved yet significant issue in your past, all right? And so this will continue until you become conscious of this process and work to change it. Your brain goes along with this because it has a chance to replay an old scenario that it is deemed a threat and needs to be mastered. For example, Kate's unconscious mind knows that she struggles with abandonment issues, right? So she unconsciously chooses Todd as her partner, not realizing that he abandons ship whenever challenged. Her brain, though, initially sees Todd's propensity to abandon ship as a good thing because she's experienced that before, so it knows how to navigate people who do this. Again, this is not logical, nor is it necessarily healthy. However, its job is to look for familiarity, which therefore means safe, right? So this is all until Kate makes the bold decision to drop Todd like a hot pocket, because once she realizes he has a pattern of ghosting, abandoning partners when challenged, she realizes this isn't healthy and it's not something that I want to deal with. All right. So she had two choices: accept his behavior and open the door to trauma bonds, or pay attention to her attraction to this red flag, which are unconscious wounds that need to be resolved, and decline the invite into an emotionally volatile relationship. Again, how many of you have been there? Right? Where you decide, oh, 2, 3, 4, 5 red flags in, you're like, oh, well, I want someone who wouldn't give up on me, because we all make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes, yes. However, We have to begin to recognize when the red flags that we are attracted to are really signs of trauma bonds down the line. So, if she saw herself trying to fix Todd or audition, perform so that he wouldn't continue to abandon her, right? That's a trauma bond getting ready to start around her abandonment wound, right? So, what her job is again to pay attention to these red flags. How many of us, regardless of the red flags that are like thrown at us, we decide to just run in full force to the relationship because we're like, well, it's okay. And we kind of pretend like we don't see these things. And oftentimes we don't, right? So it's really not our fault. We really don't realize that these red flags are red flags that need to be avoided, right? We don't have to engage in a relationship in order to learn a lesson. We can actually just do like what Kate did in this situation and say, you know what? This person abandons me every single time there's a problem. This is going to be problematic for me, so it's time that I move on from the situation. All right? So, I want you to sit with this information and ponder, how does it all show up today in your relationships? What flags, what markers, or what indications you need to be aware of in an effort to avoid replaying old wounds in your relationships? All right? So, this brings us to the end of our presentation. Again, as I said, this is the end of part 1. The next video will focus on creating physiological safety in your relationships. And so we'll be focusing on identifying your trauma's physiological response in your body. And we will also discuss rewiring your nervous system response. All right. So I hope you all found this helpful. You will find the masterclass workbook below this presentation.